If you need to move unconventionally in any way, break stuff open, or want to be a debuff king without casting a spell, the athletic skill might just have everything that you need and everything that you're after. There's only one trained action in athletics, but if your build can accommodate it and it makes sense, and that basically means that strength isn't your dump stat for whatever class you're trying to play, it's a pretty hard one to pass up. There are so many different things you can do. Having the trained proficiency is definitely helpful, but there are so many things you can do even if you're not trained that it's really worth taking a look at. So, my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, the athletic skill is a strength based skill. So, the higher your strength is, kind of the better you're going to be at it. And it allows you to perform deeds of physical prowess. So, a lot of different movement types, a lot of different debuffing attacks, a lot of different ways to move around the battlefield will kind of come out of your athletics. And if you want to use the escape basic action, you can go ahead and use your athletics modifier instead of your unarmed attack modifier. So it's a pretty good thing to kind of have. With that, let's go ahead and go into some of the actions that you can do with athletics and see just how many different things there are. I was thinking of grouping this into the movement and then from there kind of go into the attacks and the debuffs. But I think we're going to go just along with how it's set up in the book. Once again, I'll link to the pages in the description with the remaster. I kind of don't want to put it on the video itself. Otherwise, I might have to redo everything when that comes out. But let's start with climb. So with climb, it is a movement and it does require that you have both hands free. So unless it is a very small, like three, depending on your height, if you're a gnome or a halfling, it might be a little bit different. But depending on your height, if it is a minor thing, you won't necessarily need to do climb. But if it is anything but particularly easy, you will have to attempt an athletics check. The GM will determine the DC ahead of time, and it really depends on the incline, the height, and whatever environmental conditions. If it is a muddy slope, it's going to be much harder than a brick wall that might have little handholds all through it. Whenever you are attempting to climb, you are flat footed unless you very specifically have a climb speed listed in your movement. This does have the normal success features. On a critical success, you move up, across, or safely down the incline 5 feet plus 5 feet per 20 feet of your land speed. So for most player characters, it's going to be about 10 feet. On a success, you do the same up, across, or safely down an incline for 5 feet per 20 feet of your land speed. So it is basically going to be 5 feet for most PCs and a minimum of 5 feet if your speed is below 20. So if you are very slow or encumbered, you will still be able to move the 5 feet. A failure is a failure. You basically just don't climb or go down. And on a critical failure, if you begin the climb on stable ground, you will fall and land prone. Now, there are various sample climb tasks they have. Untrained would be ladders, steep slope, low branch tree. Trained would be rigging or rope. A typical tree. Expert would be a wall with small handholds or and footholds. So that would be once again that like brick walls or rock walls that have the chinks where the mortar would be. Master would be a ceiling with handholds or footholds. So you'd be able to actually go horizontally on a ceiling, which would be pretty awesome. And legendary means that you can pretty much climb a smooth surface. There is a chart here we'll go ahead and highlight that does have your climbing. And when we get to swim, it'll be the same depending on what your land speed is. And it'll tell you based on a success or critical success. So it's kind of handy to have. Once again, for most players, it's going to be one of those first two lines on there. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to another single action. And it's going to be force open. To begin with, force open is an attack, so it is susceptible to the multiple attack penalty. What you are doing is you are using your body, a lever, maybe your sword or something along those lines, or some other tool. You are trying to forcibly open a door, a window, a lid of a container, some type of gate, anything that could open but is currently locked or jammed. With a high enough result, you can even smash through walls, but that would require you to be pretty highly trained at it or fairly high level. Without a crowbar, prying something open takes a -2 item penalty to the athletics check to force it open. So if this is something you plan on doing a lot, having a crowbar might be something you might want to keep in mind. Now, same as everything else, and I believe all of these are going to have this, is the success conditions are pretty standard. On a critical success, you open the door, window, container, the gate, or whatever lid it might have, and you can't avoid damaging it in the process. So you would open it without really letting pursuers or someone who come by later to even know that you were there. On a success, you break the door, window, container, or gate open, and it will gain the broken condition. So it is immediately obvious to pursuers or anybody coming along later that you have forced it open. If it's especially sturdy, the GM might have it take damage but not be broken, so it might require multiple force opens. Failure is a failure, and on a critical failure, you basically jam it and it will impose a -2 circumstance penalty on future attempts to force it open. So not only will you not do it, but you make further checks harder. It does have some sample force open tasks. If you're untrained, it's fabric, flimsy glass, things along those lines. Trained would be ice or sturdy glass. Expert would be just your normal kind of flimsy wooden door, wooden portcullis. Master would be a sturdy, kind of bolstered wooden door. Iron portcullis, metal bar. And legendary would be the ability to force open stone or iron doors. After that, we're going to go on to another one that I really like. It's a really good debuff, is the Grapple. Now, Grapple is a single action. It is an attack, so once again, multiple attack penalty is enforced. You have to have at least one hand free. Your target is also not more than one size larger than you. There are ways to get around that with a Titan, but we're going to take this just as a low-level single grapple. What you're trying to do is you are attempting to grab a creature or object with your free hand. You would do your athletics check against the target's fortitude DC. And if you have a target in a grapple already, you would need to re-grapple to keep them in the same restrained condition without having a hand free. This does have the normal success conditions, and on a critical success, your target is restrained until the end of your next turn unless you move or your target escapes. Once again, a target, when it is grappled, does have the ability on its turn to try to escape from you. And it does have the restrained condition on a critical success. On a success, your target is grabbed until the end of your next turn, unless you move or it passes its escape check. On a failure, you fail to grab your target. That's really all that happens. If the target was already grappled or restrained using a grapple, then it ends on that particular turn. On a critical failure, if you already had the target grabbed or restrained, it will break free immediately, not at the end of your turn, but immediately. And your target can either grab you, and if it succeeds in using the grapple action against you, on a critical failure, if you already had the target grappled or restrained in any way, it will immediately break free. Your target can either grab you as if it succeeded on a grapple, or force you to fall down and go prone. Now we're going to move back into a movement that doesn't have the move trait, actually two of them. They're both jumps, the high jump and the long jump, and both of these have the leap basic action attached to them. So on a high jump, you would have to do an initial stride of 10 feet and then make a vertical leap with a DC 30 athletics check to increase the height of your jump. If you didn't stride those 10 feet, then you will automatically fail. The DC might be increased or decreased depending on the situation as determined by the GM. If it is an exceptionally high wall, the surface you're jumping from might be slippery or might have bad traction, could be gravel. These things might affect the DC. On a critical success, you increase the maximum vertical distance to 8 feet or increase the maximum vertical distance to 6 feet and a maximum horizontal distance to 10 feet. On a success, you would increase the maximum vertical distance to 5 feet. On a failure, it would just be a normal leap. And on a critical failure, you don't leap at all, and instead you fall prone in whatever space you started from. Next, we're going to move on to a long jump. On a long jump, similar to a high jump, you have to stride, then make a horizontal leap and attempt an athletics check to increase the length of your jump. The DC of the athletics check is equal to the total distance in feet you're attempting to move during your leap. So it would be from not the stride, but from the start of the jump to where you want to end up. So basically, you need to succeed a DC 20 check in order to leap 20 feet. You can't leap farther than your speed. So, like with the high jump, you have to stride at least 10 feet. If you didn't stride at least 10 feet, or you attempt to jump in a different direction, let's say that a attacker surprised you with an attack of opportunity and you tried to move instead of forward, you try to jump to the side. If you had a reaction that allowed you to do that, then you automatically fail your check. And just like with a high jump, the DC might be increased or decreased depending on the conditions. Once again, if it was a slippery surface or sand or gravel or somewhere where you were leaping from that would make it harder, then they could increase the DC. The DC might be increased or decreased due to the situation, kind of like the high jump. If it's a slippery surface or if you're jumping from gravel or sand or something that might make it harder to leap, then the GM could decrease or increase the DC. It doesn't necessarily have a critical success, but it does have a success, which means you are increasing the maximum horizontal distance you leap to the desired distance. On a failure, it would just be a normal leap. And on a critical failure, you leap normally, but then fall and land prone. Now let's move on to the next one, which is shove. Shove is a single action attack. You need to have at least one hand free, and the target can't be more than one size larger than you. Once again, can be adjusted with certain feats, but that's not something we're going to get into here. But what you are doing is you are basically shoving. You're pushing the creature away from you, and in an athletics check against the target's fortitude DC, on a critical success, you push your target 10 feet away from you, and then you can stride immediately after it, but you must move the same direction as the shove. On a success, you push your target 5 feet, and you can stride after it, but you must move the same distance and in the same direction as with the critical success. A failure, you just fail the shove, and on a critical failure, you lose your balance, fall, and land prone with the conditions associated with prone. With that, we're going to move on to, I believe, our last movement, which is swim. So swim is a single action, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to swim through the water. Unless you are trained, it pretty much has to be calm water, like a lake or other still water. But in very, very calm water, you can succeed at the action without needing to attempt a check. This is once again up to the GM. If you must breathe air, this doesn't handle that at all. So you would have to take a potion or be something that is part of your ancestry, but the swim skill does not allow you to breathe underwater. If you do fail to hold your breath by checking it each round, you begin to drown. And if the water you're swimming in is turbulent, is where this athletics check is going to come from. If you end your turn in water and you haven't succeeded at a swim action for that turn, you will sink 10 feet or get moved by the current, depending on what the GM determines would be appropriate for the current situation. But if the last action of your turn was to enter this water, then you wouldn't necessarily sink or move with the current in this specific turn. Now, success conditions are pretty normal. There's a critical success, you move through the water 10 feet. plus 5 feet per 20 feet of your land speed. So it is a fraction of your land speed would affect how far you can move on a critical success, as well as the success, which is move through the water 5 feet plus 5 feet per 20 feet of your land speed. And on a failure, you just fail to swim. On a critical failure, you make no progress. And if you're holding your breath, you will lose 1 round of air. And finally, we're going to move on to trip, which is the last untrained action we'll be covering, but it is kind of a doozy. It is one that works really well for melee or front line characters, or if you have a ranged weapon from the back, something like a whip or something along those lines. It is really helpful to debuff creatures. Now, the requirements for this single action with the attack trait is you must have at least 1 hand free, and your target can't be more than 1 size larger than you. There are weapons that do have a tripping trait, so those could be used as well. You are trying to knock the creature to the ground and make them prone. You are going to be doing an athletics check against the target's reflex DC. Now, the critical success for this is the target falls and lands prone and takes 1d6 bludgeoning damage, so you can get a little damage out of this as well. On a success, the target falls and lands prone with the conditions associated with that. A failure means you didn't trip, and on a critical failure, you are the one who loses your balance and lands prone, and will have to accept the circumstance penalties because of that. With those covered, let's go ahead and move on to the single trained action. Now, athletics does have a trained action, and it's called Disarm. Disarm is a single action with the attack trait, so it is subject to the multiple attack penalty. You have to have a hand free, and the target can't be more than 1 size larger than you. There are weapons that will assist you with disarming, and you're going to be looking for that particular trait in that weapon if this is something that you want to do. I do hear a lot of people maligning Disarm a little bit, saying it's not really worth it. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. And we're going to get into that when we cover the success conditions. On a critical success, you are doing what it says on the tin, which is you are knocking the item out of the target's grasp. It falls to the ground in the target space, so they have no weapon or no item in their hand, depending on what you're trying to do, and they have to spend an action to pick it up. That's fantastic. On a success condition, you weaken the target's grasp on the item. They don't have a good handhold, and until the start of the next creature's turn, attempt to disarm that target will get a +2 circumstance bonus, and the target takes a -2 circumstance bonus to attacks with that item or any other check until they reestablish a firm grasp on that item. That's a -2 circumstance penalty until their next action. I still think that's pretty fantastic. Failure means you fail to disarm, and on a critical failure, you are the one who loses your balance, and you become flat-footed until the start of your next turn when you can regain your balance. Now, athletics is a fantastic skill. There's a lot involved in it. There are a bunch of actions that do not require you to be trained or have any proficiency in this whatsoever. The proficiency will help you, and if, once again, becoming that debuffing non-spell king or queen, or having additional movement options, it's a really good skill to have if you can afford it in your character build. I hope this gave you some new ideas or made you think about things a different way, especially the disarm. I particularly like that one, and I think it gets a lot of hate for no reason. But all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.